Why does the distance between our kids feel so much bigger today than they did in the 1980s? You know, in the 1980s, your parents didn't know where you were for 10 hours straight, and everybody was fine with it. Today, we can track our kids, and they're only a text or a phone call away. Yet we feel farther away from them than we ever did. Why does more technology mean less connection? So the question is, why do we feel less connected to our kids now than we did in the 1980s? And here's something worth thinking about for a second. In the 1980s, a kid could leave the house after breakfast on a Saturday morning and not come home till the streetlights came on at night. We had no phones, no GPS, and no way for our parents to reach us. And there was actually a TV commercial that would come on every single night asking parents, "It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?" Because a lot of parents didn't know, and that was normal. Now, think about today. You can see exactly where your kids are on your phone right now. You can text them, you can call them, you can track their location, you can reach them within seconds. And yet, 66% of parents in the US say that it's harder to parent their kids today than it was 20 years ago, with most of them pointing to technology as the reason. So here's the question. Before cell phones, parents had no idea where their kids were, and today we know all of it at the tip of our fingers. So why does the distance between parents and kids seem bigger now than it ever has been? The tools we use today to stay connected with our kids changed completely. And years ago, it was just payphones or calling from a friend's house. And today it's cell phones. But what do our kids actually need from us to stay connected? That part never changed. And the cell phones didn't create the distance between parents and the kids. It just made it a lot easier to hide from. If you grew up in the 80s or the early 90s, you already know how this is going to play out. You left the house and you were gone. Not just a little gone, you were completely unreachable gone. You could have literally been on the backside of the moon and no adult in your house would have known where you were. I'm talking about bike rides that covered half of the neighborhood and woods that your parents didn't even know about. Pickup games that went on until it got dark. And the parenting rules were simple. Don't get into trouble and just be home when the streetlights came on. There were no check-in calls, no just letting you know where I am text. Your parents had no way of reaching you. And here's the interesting part. That arrangement was actually doing something really important for both kids and parents. For the kids, it was building something that's become almost rare today. Independence and problem solving, the kind of confidence that comes from figuring the world out without your parents being available to fix things every minute that they get hard. You figure things out because you had to. And here's the part that gets overlooked. What was it doing to the parents? You know, when your kid came home at the end of the day, that was the time for connection. That was the moment that parents actually found out what was happening with their kids for the day. They asked questions like, where did you go? What did you do? Who were you with? The conversations that they had weren't optional. It was the only way for a parent to find anything out. Not because the 80s parents were better at communicating than we are, but because the absence of that technology made conversation necessary if you wanted to know anything about your child's life. The connection happened out of necessity because there was no other option. Now, let's bring that forward to today, because on paper, we're more connected to our kids than any generation of any parent in history. And we can reach our kids at any time. We know exactly where they are. You'd think that communication would be better, but the 1980s has a secret connection ingredient that we've accidentally deleted from our lives. So stick with me and I'll show you how to get that back in just a few minutes. Think about what the cell phones actually changed, not just for your kids, but for you. You send your kids text and they respond with, "I'm fine." And you think, okay, now I don't have to worry about it. You check the location app and you can see that they're at a friend's house. Now you don't need to talk to them because you know that they're okay. You can reach them instantly and the conversation doesn't feel urgent anymore. This is the crazy part. We traded a face-to-face conversation with our kids for a dot on a map. When did that even become a fair trade? Just think about that for a second. Because now you know where they are, and you don't need to know what happened to them today, what they were thinking about, or what's bothering them, or what they figured out on their own, and what they've been struggling with, but they just haven't found the words to tell you about. The cell phone gave us the ability to monitor our kids at the exact same time that it gave us a reason to really stop talking to them. And here's the thing that really gets me about all this. Researchers ask kids directly, if you want to spend less time on your phone, what would it actually take to make that happen? They expected to hear answers like less rules and more limits and better parenting controls. But you know what the kids actually said? More unstructured time with friends, more freedom to just be a kid, less constant supervision and more trust. They weren't asking for less technology, they were asking for the thing that disappeared when the technology arrived. The space to grow up a little without somebody watching every single move. I used to think that this was a society problem until I realized that this was something that I was actually doing in my own home. I was the dad who always knew where my kids were through phone calls and check-in texts. We were always connected. And for a long time, I told myself that that was good parenting. But here's what I realized when I actually looked at it. Knowing where they were had started to replace actually talking to them. I had the information I thought I needed to make sure that they were safe, but what I didn't have with them was the connection. I knew that they were at practice, and I didn't always know how practice went. I knew they were at home, but I didn't always know what was going on in their head. The 80s kid that came home that told their parent everything because that conversation was the only option, that kid had something that we accidentally engineered out of our own houses. We missed the conversation that should have been, what were you up to all day? That could have turned into a connection, and that turns into a kid who actually talks to you. I traded that comfort for a location pin, and I didn't always realize that I made the trade. I don't think any of us realized that we sacrificed the connection to our kids over the convenience of making sure they were just fine. Now, here's the part that I want to be careful about, because I am not saying throw the phones away. And I'm not saying that the 80s parents were parenting in the golden age. There were real risks that came with that much freedom and that little supervision. What I am saying is something more specific, and hear me out. Here's what the research on this actually tells us. Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Anxious Generation, identified 4 specific things a phone-based childhood is doing to our kids: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. He found that phones are basically starving our kids from the things that they need most, like sleep and focus and real friends. Now compare that to the 80s kid disappearing on their bike for 10 hours. What was that kid doing that today's kids aren't? Because building real social skills through human interaction and getting physically tired enough to actually sleep, staying present in the moment because there was nothing else to look at, and getting just bored enough to figure out how to be creative on their own. The phone didn't create the problem by existing, it created the problem by filling in all the space where the important stuff used to happen. Now, here's the big thing, because this is exactly what we talked about in my last video, and the tools have changed completely. But where your kid actually needs from you to feel connected, that part never did. The 80s kid needed a parent who was present and curious when they came home. And today's kids need exactly the same thing. Not a parent who monitors them, a parent who actually wants to know them. And no app and no check-in text has ever been a substitute for that. So here's one thing that I want to leave you with, and try this for a week. Instead of checking on the location app, talk to them. Instead of a "where are you" text, wait until they get home to have a conversation. Create one moment in a day where the phone is free and out of your hands. It could be at dinner or a drive, or 20 minutes where the screens are completely off. Not because technology is the enemy, but because connection still needs exactly what it always needed: presence, attention, and a reason to talk. The 80s gave kids and parents the reason by default. There was no other option. Today you have to choose it deliberately, but the choice is there every single day. So, raising kids before cell phones versus today, who actually figured it out? Honestly, I still think that's the wrong question. 80s parents had no idea where their kids were, and that came with real risks. Today's parents know everything, and that comes with its own set of problems. But somewhere in between those two extremes is the one thing that both eras of kids needed from their parents. Not surveillance and not absence. Just a parent who's genuinely curious about what they're becoming. That was true only when there was a connection and a conversation at the end of the night, and it's true now. It'll be true when your kids are raising their own kids and whatever technology exists then. The era changes, the work doesn't. So drop a comment below. Did you grow up in the 1980s or the 90s as a kid with that kind of freedom? And if you did, are you giving your own kids that kind of freedom today? I really want to hear both sides of that, because life isn't hacked, it's built. And I'll see you in the next one.